Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar, Email Strategies to Drive Your Business from Start to Inbox to Dollars. We're excited to take a closer look at how email can help you build brand awareness, increase website traffic, and improve lead generation. But before we start the program, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items. We will be leaving time at the end of the presentation for questions. You can go ahead and send in your questions as they come up for you, and I'll put them into the queue to be answered at the end of the webinar. To send a question, simply click on the Questions tab in your control panel, type your question into the top box, and click on the Send button. If you have any technical difficulties during the presentation, please use that same question feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. We will be providing you with a recording of the webinar and a copy of the PowerPoint slides, so keep an eye on your inbox for a link to those materials either this afternoon or tomorrow. You'll also notice in your control panel that there are 2 handouts available. These are resources that we'll be discussing during the webinar, and they're going to be very useful tools for you to use as you plan your back-to-school marketing strategy. So take a moment to download those before you log off from the webinar. Finally, we will be asking your opinion during the webinar, so be sure to pay attention and take an opportunity to participate in our polls. Now let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Suzanne Morgan and Dave Cohen. Suzanne is the Director of Customer Experience at Agile. She has worked in the education, data, and marketing industry for more than 15 years. Prior to joining Agile as one of its very first employees, Suzanne held positions at both MDR and QED, working in database services, account management, and client services management. Suzanne has a deep understanding of education data and email marketing in particular, and helps clients on a daily basis use Agile's data and services to achieve outstanding results. Suzanne has a BS in psychobiology from Binghamton University, and she enjoys cooking, crafting, including some pretty darn amazing Halloween costumes, and spending time with her family. Suzanne is joined today by Agile's General Manager, Dave Cohen. His experience includes a tenure with International Capital Partners, a Connecticut-based venture capital where he provided turnaround management and managed exit initiatives within the firm's distressed portfolio companies. Dave also worked for Scholastic shortly after its acquisition of quality education data. There, he was tasked with providing financial, operational, and strategic guidance and leadership to restore QED's financial health, culminating in the successful sale to Dun & Bradstreet. Dave studied at Florida State University, where he earned a Master's of Business Administration. We are excited to have both Dave and Suzanne with us today, and they've got lots of insights and expertise to share about email marketing. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand the program over to Suzanne now.
Thank you, Emily, and welcome to everyone out there in the audience. I'm very excited to share some learnings and best practices I've experienced in my tenure here at Agile, as well as in the education marketing space in general, where I've worn a number of hats, as Emily said, in the almost 15 years I've worked in this industry. So let's kick this off. Build-A-Bear was in the news recently, and perhaps due to a slight drop in their stock, or maybe there was a launch event to increase registration in their rewards program on the calendar, maybe it'd been there for a while, but I think we can agree that the Build-A-Bear Pay Your Age Day was not an overwhelming success. Details of the event spread like wildfire on social media, and though everyone that participated was required to provide their email address to get the low-cost bear, the long lines became safety issues, and events at all stores were shut down early. And in fact, even days after the event, if you started typing build into Google, the first thing that came up was Build-A-Bear fail. A better way to approach this would have been for Build-A-Bear to profile their existing best customers and come up with a formula to target similar looking prospects. As a marketer, you really want to avoid filling your sales team's pipeline with extraneous leads that aren't likely to yield sales. This will also ensure that you are providing any new customers with a great experience and therefore increasing the likelihood that they'll be customers for life. So how does all this come together with email? Email should be a really important part of your communication mix. And there are generally 3 things you're trying to accomplish with email. You're trying to build awareness of your brand with the right people. You're trying to increase traffic to your website, because once someone has come to your website, you're really able to learn more about them by understanding the pages they visit and how long they spend on each page. And you're trying to increase revenue. So you might end up targeting fewer people, but if they're the right people, your sales team won't have to spend as much time converting them to customers. So when you're using emails to prospect, you want the right messages to the right people so your messages get opened and they get responded to. So let's take a look at the landscape. There are almost 2 billion websites out there. So relying solely on an organic web search, it just might not be enough to get the leads you need to sustain your business. The average professional receives around 121 emails every day, and that's just on their work email. But most people have a work email and at least one personal email address, maybe quite a few. So how do you get and keep someone's attention in the limited amount of time you have? Let's start with the devices used to check email. So I'm really curious to know what you think about how email is accessed. Are folks primarily using their phone or maybe their desktop in the office? Or maybe you'd think most emails checked on webmail at home because there's just not enough time in the day to get to all of it. What do you think? So this is the first of 2 polls. I'm really curious to know where you think, what devices are used to access your email. So we'll just give it a little bit here, hoping everyone is able to view the poll. So I'm not, I don't see what's being shared.
Okay, great. Well, we did have a lot of people participate in the poll, and 75% believe that mobile is the most common way for folks, or the most common device used for opening emails. And then the remaining 25% said desktop. No one thinks that webmail is used.
Interesting. Well, here is what the research actually says. So maybe because most of us here are in education, we're experiencing the same kind of environment that these crazy busy teachers and educators are experiencing. Because the percent, so if you think about educators, in particular those in the classroom every day, the percent checking email on mobile devices is likely higher, just as y'all think there in the audience. They might have a few minutes in between classes or during group work or maybe during a free period to peruse their inbox. We also find quite often that there are firewalls and other security measures in place that prevent teachers or administrators from viewing their emails during the day. Given this limited amount of time, what you're sending needs to be relevant and needs to meet a current need. Let's dig a little deeper into opens by device. And again, mobile, which is the pink lines up here, or dots up here on the top. Look at the calendar. There's no seasonality and there's very little shift. It is just so very important to focus on the mobile environment and the mobile experience. So we know that folks read their emails on their phones when they're not in their professional environment, where time is most definitely limited. But where do you think emails are most likely read? Em, can you launch the next poll?
Absolutely.
So I'll take just another minute here to see what you guys think, and then we'll see what the research actually says. Really hoping that you're not checking your email in the bathroom.
All right, I am going to close the poll. And it looks like an overwhelming percentage of folks are checking email in bed at 67%. Suzanne, I'm sad to share with you that 25% are checking their email in the bathroom, and 8% while driving, which is a total safety hazard. So that's how our audience feels. Let's see what the research actually said.
So yeah, the research is almost mirroring what y'all think. Most people are reading their emails on their phones in bed, followed closely by the bathroom, which is very, very sad to me. So given that my cell phone is also my alarm clock, after dismissing my alarm, or let's be honest, hitting snooze once or twice, I go through my 3 inboxes while still in bed. I start with the work account and I delete what's not relevant, and that's typically the bulk of my inbox. I will flag what I need to address as soon as I get to my desk, and the rest gets a glance skimming. It's really don't focus a lot of time on the stuff that's kind of in the middle there. So given this, do you really think folks checking their emails first thing in the morning or right before falling asleep or in the bathroom want to read an email that has lots of paragraphs and requires lots of scrolling? Probably not. Another reason to keep your messaging relevant and to the point is that you don't want potential customers to unsubscribe. If someone opts out that was never going to be a good fit, awesome. You don't want to keep people on your list that are never going to engage. The top reason people unsubscribe from email lists is they get too many emails in general. But what you might not realize is 24% of marketers don't manage their lists. This could be their house file, their prospect lists, maybe what's ever in their CRM lead. And 42% of marketers don't target their emails. So just a little work, you're going to be way ahead of your competition. So let's get back to inbox to dollars. As I've mentioned a few times, you want your messaging to be relevant and reflect that you know your audience. In education, you also want to illustrate that you know the buying cycle. If you refer to your webinar control panel, you'll see a couple handouts, as Emily mentioned during the beginning of our session here. And the first is going to be Agile's Purchasing Cycle Guide. The guide is a fantastic tool to refer to when considering time of year and what marketing tool to utilize to make the most impact. So how much ahead of the competition will you be if you consider just these things? If you target your campaigns, you'll be better than half of other players in the market. If you optimize your list, you're going to be better than almost 25%. If you consider most are looking at emails on their phones, you're going to reach 55% of your audience. And if you personalize your messages brief and to the point, you're going to see performance increase by almost 30%. Now let's get into how do you target a list. One of the most important things to consider when developing your campaign strategy is who is purchasing and who is influencing the decision to purchase. This is a graph taken from some research done here at Agile regarding EdTech purchasing decisions. What we found is that in the EdTech space, just a side note, we are launching similar research into some other areas specific to education later this year. But in EdTech, there is definitely more than one person involved in purchasing. You've got the IT sector, you might expect. You've got principals of schools, you've got the superintendent influencing decisions, and definitely curriculum directors making sure that their current programs and plans are going to work with any new information technology program that gets implemented. So when you're prospecting a new district, you need your messages to reach the people with the right roles. Your messaging needs to address the specific product can help them solve. These messages need to be personalized and they need to be brief. We have found that messages with 20 or fewer lines and less than 3 images with a very clear call to action are what works. So plan your work and work your plan. Once you've identified your targets, you need to know the purchasing cycle, so messages reach the right people at the right time throughout the year. Again, you can refer to Agile's Purchasing Cycle Guide in your panel. The timeline for purchasing some big ticket items in EdTech might be more than a year long. They're making plans in May, then raising awareness in the fall, into winter. Trials might be happening again, late winter, early spring. And then purchases are made and implemented in the summer when there's time to test and make any necessary tweaks. Know your audience and know their specific buying cycle. And then teachers, on the other hand, in particular for classroom supplies and other curriculum materials, they make very quick decisions, often spending their own money. And this information was also from some of the research done here at Agile. So in targeting your campaigns, really consider creating unique messages for different roles. And if you don't know, ask. I regularly recommend to my clients to test. Send out a survey with 2 or 3 of those questions you just can't figure out. Offer an incentive. A $5 Starbucks card is a great way to thank an educator for taking a few minutes out of their very busy day to answer a few questions. Like, why did you decide to make this purchase? Why didn't you renew? Was it based on cost? Was it based on ease of use? What are your challenges today? If you have a product available today or are possibly considering development of something new, knowing what people are looking for will help you in the long run. So ask those questions, send out those surveys. Another tool that might help your organization identify who is purchasing or influencing purchases is a buyer persona sheet. You'll see the example I have here is available as a handout in your panel. When filling these out, you'll want to get feedback from your sales team and maybe customer service. Completing these persona guides will really help you identify the roles and the traits and characteristics of your customers. So back to mobile. Keeping your emails concise lends really well to the mobile environment. You're going to want to think about all aspects of the email: your subject line, your preview text, your header, your description, your call to action, even the footer when crafting your messages and what point you are trying to convey and what you want the responder to do. Be clear. You want to keep your subject lines concise, truthful, and informative. Give the reader a brief preview of what to expect in your message. Don't be misleading. And do this all while keeping in mind that most emails are read on a mobile device. Around 1/3 of all emails are deleted based on the subject line alone. Like me, while in bed, or not like me, in the bathroom. And a general rule of thumb is 50 characters or less for your subject lines. On phones, you might see the subject line is cut off after 35 or 36 characters. So keep the important part of your subject line in the beginning and test, test, test. Find out what works best for you. So personalization doesn't just mean, hey, Suzanne, what do you know about Suzanne's district or school, and how has she engaged with your brand in the past? Is she the principal, or is she a second grade teacher? Is this her first year teaching? If she's the principal, what are her challenges today? What might they be next month or in the next year, or when there's a new superintendent or president or secretary of education? How does your product address her current challenges now? How might it help her with a few modifications? You should be using your CRM data as well as any data that has been overlaid to segment your messages. A school struggling to meet ELA standards will not have the same challenges as a school with 100% parent support that is exceeding expectations in all subject areas. Understand the data and use it to create effective and pertinent messaging. Messages that are opened and are engaged with. Now let's move on to keeping your optimized marketing programs running. The backbone of your email marketing efforts has got to be the data. And then Dave Cohen is going to give us some insights into the current regulatory landscape. So a clean database is critical to everyone in your organization: sales, marketing, customer service, management. Keeping your database clean and current is the best way to have strong and accurate information to incorporate into message segmentation and personalization. And here are the steps that I recommend to my clients, and this is what we practice here at Agile. First, as a company, you need to establish business rules. What fields do you maintain and what is stored in your CRM system? What is stored in your marketing automation system? What fields are stored in both? Lead source, for example, will likely be maintained in your CRM and stored in your CRM, but what about district size or annual Title I funding? You might find that they are stored in both, so they can be used in reporting as well as when segmenting your messages. And permissions are also important. What can be maintained or updated by marketing versus sales, and what changes are only made by admin in your organization. Develop your business rules and make sure everyone in your organization understands them. Lead handling. You need to be able to identify where in the sales process a lead or contact sits. What is the protocol for passing a contact between phases in your lead nurturing funnel? And how do you determine a lead is a legitimate opportunity? Establish your rules and make sure your sales and marketing teams understand them. Constantly scrubbing your email prospecting list is also super important. You want to promptly remove opt-outs and hard bounces from your list. You can also analyze your soft bounce logs to remove any addresses with permanent failures. These are actually hard bounces as well. There are real hard costs associated with your marketing automation system. Keeping your list clean will not only save you money, but will also increase the likelihood that you'll see engagement from the rest of your list when sending segmented and relevant messaging. And you'll also keep your sending reputation high, which is so very important in email marketing. You also want to stay on top of and understand the regulatory environment. Today's environment is much more stringent and complex than ever before. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Dave Cohen now, who's going to walk us through the latest on privacy and regulations. Dave?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. And want to begin by just introducing the two new sets of legislation that is requiring compliance in the maintenance, collection, and the utilization of personal information. GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, took effect in May and kind of caused a bit of confusion and concern, especially here in the US, on how to be compliant and if it is necessary to be compliant. Basically, GDPR is intended for any organization conducting business in the EU or is offering goods and services to EU residents. The second legislation, which is set to take effect in January 1st, 2020, is the California Consumer Privacy Act. It is the strictest in the US, and it's probably going to be the baseline for the remainder of the states. Good news is, if you are GDPR compliant, you're going to be compliant in California, as the California Consumer Privacy Act basically tackles a subset of what GDPR does. Next slide, please. For GDPR, there are a few regulatory considerations. The first is that GDPR applies to the person, or otherwise known as the data subject. The intent of GDPR was to actually give people a little bit more control over their personal information that is being utilized, especially in an environment where privacy and security over personal information is so important, especially with the rash of recent hacks into companies' systems, and people need to be aware of what is being collected and how it's being collected. The second is legitimate interest is not the same as consent. While they are both considered lawful basis for the collection, the maintenance, and the utilization of personal information, they are different, and I will tackle that on the next slide. The third applies to whether or not payment is received. It does not matter if there's been any transactional history between your organization and the people in which you're trying to engage with. It has to be consistent in how it is being applied. And the fourth one is that you have to continually demonstrate that you are making to be compliant. Next slide, please. The five main areas for compliance of GDPR are scope, which basically is the intended purpose. And the intended purpose is to ensure that the personal information that you are collecting, maintaining, or utilizing in your business activities have been processed lawfully and transparent in relation to individuals, have been collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, that the information is adequate and relevant and limited to the intended purpose, must be accurate and timely, and processed in a secured manner. And with all of GDPR, there are three really main themes to people who are utilizing personal information, and that is the lawfulness of it. Is it legal in what you're doing? Being absolutely transparent in what you're collecting and what you're using it for. And the third is it has to be relevant to the intended purpose, which gets to the next section, which is the consent and lawful basis of GDPR. For most of us on the phone, there are three areas of lawful basis which you can use to collect and maintain and utilize the personal information. The first one is the easiest one. It has to be explicit. You have to get consent from the person that they are allowing you to utilize their information, to collect and utilize your information. The second is the purpose for a legitimate interest. And the difference between the legitimate interest and the consent is that the legitimate interest is saying, we're going to go ahead and collect all this information about you, and we don't believe it's going to harm you. However, you need to tell us if you don't want us to do it. And the third part is whether you have to collect information on people as it pertains to a contractual obligation you have. They're already a client of yours, and it's part of a service that you're offering that you have to continually collect information on them to either have them be able to utilize the product effectively or to be able to enhance the offerings of the product to the client. The third part is the right to access, which is basically the right to information. And this is where the California Consumer Privacy Act comes into play, because it almost mirrors this section. The data subjects or the people that you are collecting information on must be informed. They have, which can be in the form of privacy policies, terms of use, or outright consent to collect. They have the right to access their data, to correct it, to delete and restrict the collection of their data. They also have the right to obtain a portable copy of their data in a format that is easy to retrieve and understand. Privacy by design is where the interface or the platform design has to ensure the compliance. It has to ensure the security of the information which you are collecting is maintained in a manner in which it is not easily identifiable in the event of a breach. And the final part is the accountability. You have to constantly prove that you are in compliance, and that can be done with policies, procedures, and documentation. The administrative fines for noncompliance are pretty strict, and they can be pretty harsh. There's 10 different criteria used in determining the level of violation and the amount of the fines, which can range from 2 to 4% of your worldwide revenue. Next slide, please. The regulatory considerations for the California Consumer Privacy Act is basically mirrors the right to be informed and the right to access of GDPR. Your customers or your prospects will have to know all the data is collected, but have the right to say no to the sale of the information, right to delete your data, right to be informed of what categories of data will be collected. You have to have an opt-in before the sale of any children's information, right to know the categories of third parties with whom your data is shared, right to know the categories of sources of information from whom your data was acquired, right to know the business or commercial purpose of collecting your information. The enforcement is by the Attorney General of the State of California, but there are civil remedies as well. And the civil remedies, you can be sued by an individual for up to $750 per occurrence. And if the Attorney General steps in and determines that the violation has been intentional and egregious, they're fined up to $7,500 per occurrence of noncompliance. And so with any of these, it's very, very important to make sure that you are establishing a legal basis. You have a well-intended purpose for the marketing of your goods and services to those individuals, and those pieces need to really be relevant to the appropriate audience, and you must be absolutely transparent on if you're collecting information, and whether that is having somebody fill out a form that you're going to collect information on the back end, or that you have collected information based on publicly available information. And that is all I have. Next slide.
So thank you, Dave. That was all very, very interesting, and most of it went right over my head. So I'm probably going to be the one with the most questions. But in closing, don't be a Build-A-Bear. Consider your targets. Who are your best prospects, and what are the challenges they're facing? In education, know the buying cycle. Know who the people buying your product, know who the purchasers are, know who the influencers are, and use this data to craft relevant messaging. Keep in mind, remember, most folks are reading their emails on their phones, in bed, in the bathroom. Keep your messages concise, keep them clear, have a clear call to action. And most importantly, keep your data clean. I cannot stress that enough. Utilizing all these things are really going to help you to build awareness of your brand, to increase your web traffic, and ultimately you'll see an improvement in your revenue. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking time to sit in today. I'm going to turn the controls back over to Emily for questions.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Sorry, I had a little trouble unmuting myself there, but thank you, Suzanne and Dave, both for going through all of this information with us and sharing the insights that you've gathered over the years, and in particular with the new legislation that we're all facing. So we do have some questions that have come in, and we certainly have time to take more. So folks in the audience, if you have more, feel free to use that control panel and send me your questions. But we'll go ahead and get started with what we do have. So Suzanne, early on you had mentioned about the difficulty of getting past firewalls in a school environment. And so what are your recommendations for getting emails past spam filters and firewalls?
That is a really good question. And what we're finding, and new regulations happen in the email landscape, gosh, it seems like every week. So if you're sending emails out internally, make sure that you're checking your sending reputation. Make sure that you're authenticated, that you're sending what you say you're sending. Keep your messaging relevant. Talk to your IT department to make sure that you have any necessary record added to your DNS. And I can talk more, or I can describe that in another, perhaps in an email follow-up. And then test. Don't make a clear call to action, and test your emails. And it can be really hard. Like different districts use Google email, different districts use Outlook, and each of those might have their own set of policies. So it's super hard, and I wish I had a clear-cut answer on how you can do it, but the best way is just follow best practices. Keep things truthful, informative, concise, and try to keep your sending reputation high.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the technical stuff like the sending reputation and then making sure your messages are relevant, particularly with all that's going on with the Gmail inbox in terms of, you really need to have people engaging with your emails in order for them to be delivered consistently into the inbox. So
it's not easy. It's always going to be kind of a work in progress.
Yes, and as you know, it changes every day, so we always have to be on our toes to be able to respond, which is one thing that Agile does do a great job at, as I think we all know, in terms of staying on top of what are best practices, what's happening in terms of deliverability, and getting through these spam filters and firewalls. So definitely Agile is a resource for that.
And keeping your data clean. If you've got people in your email list that just aren't responding, consider removing them, or maybe try a re-engagement campaign. You're going to have the best luck getting through and not being flagged as spam if your messages are actually being engaged with.
We actually just had a follow-up question come in that I'm going to let jump the line of other questions. And it's, would sending smaller batches of emails help with getting through the spam filters?
In general, we see that they do. If you're targeting and you're really pertinent messages and it happens to be a smaller group of folks that are receiving it, I think you will.
Okay, great. Moving on from spam, but the poll definitely prompted some questions, or the research did. And so if educators aren't checking email at school or in professional settings, what's the best day and time to send emails?
That is a very good question. And it's one that I don't have a clear answer to. We see, especially when someone is checking their emails on their phone, we see opens like throughout the evening and first thing in the morning. It almost seems like there's not just that one sweet spot anymore. We see emails opened throughout the week, even on weekends.
Yeah, again, I think with email, it's changed so much. We used to say, only really send Tuesdays through Thursdays, between 8 and 3. And that's changed. And I think mobile has really driven that because as that research showed, people can check their email anywhere. And they do in unusual places. So I think testing is one of the things that we often recommend, to just really see with your different audiences. Our teachers checking early in the morning at 6:30 a.m. like Suzanne in bed and figuring out their day. Our administrators more likely to check at 2 versus 4 in the afternoon. So testing based on your job titles and other demographics, I think, is the best way to get the answer to that, because it really is so varying for every company and every product. So
yes, the landscape is changing.
Yes, rapidly. So we did have some questions come in about GDPR and the California law. The first is we do have some time before the California law goes into effect in 2020, but what are Agile's plans to comply with these new laws? And what are you doing with GDPR right now?
Well, with the ability to comply is that we're going to have to maintain right now, and it could be for California and for just the file in general, to ensure that, once again, that anybody within has access to the information that we have collected for them, and to keep on making sure that we have maintained an opt-out list, that if anybody is opted out, that we are making sure that is immediately removed from our database, and if we are engaged in deploying campaigns for any of our clients, that those emails will not be a part of that list. As far as GDPR, we are doing basically the same thing. We are ensuring ourselves that we are not collecting, because it's not part of our business to collect information on e-residents. And if we have clients that we work with that also are engaged in business with EU residents, we just want to make sure and work with them to make sure that they have the proper consent and compliance to continue to market to those residents.
Okay, great. That was definitely helpful. And one other question about that California law. If someone downloads content like a white paper, am I allowed to email them?
It doesn't state that you can't email them. You just have to make sure that they know, if you have collected information and being transparent up front, that if you download this white paper, that we are going to ask for your information, and this is what we plan on doing with your information. And that would be that we plan on contacting you to see if there is a potential business opportunity, or if there's an interest level. And so you just have to be transparent with the information that you're collecting based on that activity.
Yeah, and I think, as you said earlier, our privacy policies and having those statements when people fill out forms of how the data is used is really the key factor here.
Right, and there's a difference between whether somebody is voluntarily giving you that information, or if you are going to, on the back end, try to retrieve information about that person, for example, with the placement of cookies. Right,
and I think we've all seen in this year, as we've browsed the internet, you see more and more of those pop-ups about their cookie policies. So that's people reacting to these laws. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, Suzanne, switching back to you, do you or does Agile have any data on what email clients are used most specifically by educators? Or was that desktop mobile stat specific to education?
The stats that we provided are general. They're not specific to education. And unfortunately, we don't track by user what devices they're using, but overall, we see pretty similar breakdowns of where folks are opening their messages. The use of mobile, as we know, has just increased so sharply over the last several years. They're so easy to use. There's, you can quickly check your email and then flip in between apps and be notified when you get a new email wherever you are. So in general, you always want to consider the mobile environment when you're creating your messaging. Use a product like Litmus or Email on Acid to make sure that what you're developing is going to work for everything, but really keep in mind that the majority of folks are going to open your emails on their phones.
Well, and Suzanne, I think you've shared with me in the past some stats about people may initially open an email on a mobile device, and then they may open it again on a webmail, or vice versa, that people are actually opening the same email on a variety of different devices.
And I think I haven't, and that's so true. I mean, speaking anecdotally, that's definitely what I do. I'll go through everything first on my phone, and then those real pertinent messages that I want to follow up on or look at a little more deeply, or things that I absolutely have to follow on, I do open them again and probably even click and do my response will probably come from my desktop.
Yeah, I think that is true of a lot of people. So yeah, so the lesson is you have to optimize every single message for as many platforms as possible.
Yep.
So you touched on this a bit in the presentation, Suzanne, but maybe you can elaborate a little on why do you think that the Build-A-Bear campaign was such a failure?
I really think that it just was not targeted enough. If it was I didn't develop it, but sure, in hindsight, anyone can be a Monday morning quarterback, right? I really think that a better targeted campaign, I think I mentioned maybe profiling your customers and try to find prospects that look more like them would have helped a lot. And it would have limited the number of people that were standing in those lines. I'm going to assume that most people standing in those lines, I mean, it was probably for the one-time deal. I don't think that they're going to be those customers for life that Build-A-Bear was really trying to reach. I think that requiring people to register for their rewards program maybe by midnight the day before would have helped. Putting a time limit on that would have decreased the lines and the safety issues and would have given Build-A-Bear a better idea of what to expect.
And testing again, I'll just harp on that. Maybe rolling that out in a smaller way to begin with,
maybe
to see how it went.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe start geographically, not go, I think it was worldwide. Maybe start in just one region or a couple stores, test, and then roll out gradually.
Yeah. And while we're on targeting, with back to school almost upon us, is there a way that Agile is able to identify new schools and new educators so that we can send them special offers and welcome messages?
We totally are. We're actually in the midst of our major calling efforts right now. And one of the questions that we make sure to ask every district is about new schools. What new schools are opening this fall? What do you have slated for the next year or two? We get them, you know, we make note of them. We open the schools that are opening right away. We have date flags and year new to profession on all of our records. So it is very easy to target those new schools and the new administrators and teachers that your products are good matches for, and get those into your back to school campaigns.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to welcome a new teacher to the classroom with different offers. Great. Also related to that, you had mentioned the need to target based on demographics of schools, and you had given an example of, you know, a high-performing school versus one that doesn't have a lot of parent engagement. And how is that data available? Is that also available from Agile?
It sure is. This is one of our newest collection efforts and newest databases where we by subject area, by grade level, we're really able to, through relationships with the state departments, we're able to gather data, you know, testing level at the individual level as well, or school level, and then, you know, just overall performance. Our student performance data there's lots of fields, there's lots of information available. We have some of it even by ethnicity. Super interesting. We actually just did a webinar on that data set last month. So I would highly recommend anyone that has other questions about that data set to hop on our website and check out that webinar. It was tell you everything you need to know about it.
Yeah, that was a very informative webinar and goes pretty deep into that school performance data. So that is, as Suzanne said, available on the Agile website. And if you go there, there is a resources tab, and then there's webinars below that that you can check out the performance data webinar, as well as other webinars that we've had this year and last. Let's see. So Suzanne, just giving you a quick break, we do have another question about some of the compliance aspects of things. So Dave, does the giving people the ability to update their data mean that we need to have online accounts that people can go in and update and look at what we have on them?
As far as Agile is concerned, or just in general as in relation to GDPR?
Yeah, I think this is a more general question.
More general, yes. According to the GDPR, you have to be able to give the EU resident the ability to download a copy of all the information that they have, and that information needs to be in electronic form and has to be easy to download and has to be easy to understand. And the request to update the information would have to come from the data subject would have to request, and it doesn't have to be an online form. It could just be in the form of a correspondence email, or given some sort of means to communicate with the organization to update the data. And as far as the California is concerned, it would be along the lines of the same thing. So you would have the right to request that the company update your information to make sure that it's accurate. But there isn't there's no it's not necessary that necessarily have an online form for somebody to fill out. I think that would be helpful, but it's not a mandatory part of the regulation.
They just have to have it in some format to provide people.
They have to have it in some format, correct? And so it's the ability to take all the information that a company has on somebody and put it into basically a usable, understandable format to deliver was the challenge that many organizations were having, especially to be compliant with GDPR.
All right. Suzanne, switching back to you, this is a real nuts and bolts question, but I think it's a good one. What information is most useful in the preview text of an email? So that text that comes basically after the subject line in many email browsers.
That is an excellent question. I would say that you should utilize your preview text to maybe expand on your subject line, or give the reader an additional glimpse into what to expect when you're opening your message. What to put into your preview text is another great example of what you should be testing. I think it's going to depend a lot on what you're offering and who you're trying to target. It's just such a great new piece of real estate. So do what works best for you in it.
And I'm going to just be the broken record that says test. Use the same subject line and then test a couple different preview lines and, see which really helps to drive those opens and clicks. So as Suzanne said, I think using it to kind of add to and support your subject line is really the general best practice there. Make sure it's not just view in a browser. That shouldn't be where that real estate gets taken up.
And try not to make it be an active link too. A lot of times in an email, the first thing viewable to a reader is an image. So you're going to have that image code in your preview text if that's the first thing in your code. So really utilize that space intelligently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it looks like that is the end of our questions, and we're also getting close to the end of our time, so that worked out pretty well. So thank you again, Suzanne and Dave, for sharing the information and answering all of these questions that came in, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Just as a reminder, we will be sending you an email either this afternoon or tomorrow with a link to view the recording and download the slides. Also, when you log off from the webinar, you'll be prompted to answer a few questions. I think it's just 5 short questions. So if you would just take a minute to provide your feedback on today's program. We also are asking for any suggestions for topics for future webinars. So if there's information that you're looking for about education, marketing, or sales, feel free to share those with us, and we'll take those into consideration as we plan our future webinars. And speaking of future webinars, go ahead and mark your calendars for our next one that's coming up on August 29th. Agile CIO and Managing Partner Verlin Stevens will be joining us to share results from our annual teacher purchasing survey, along with strategies for marketing to teachers. So keep an eye on your inbox and Agile's website for details on how to register for that. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.